expensive carbon fiber bike or whatever it's made out of. Like, what's a really good bike made out of?
Yeah, it's carbon or titanium, but carbon's more common these days. Or
And probably
in
the more
general.
expensive one. So you spend all this money for a really lightweight bike, but the counterbalance is you have to get a really heavy lock because people are going to want to fucking steal it, you know?
Yeah, you don't lock up carbon fiber. Even if you lock it up, dude. I mean, I get your point. I guess I'm going off on a tangent. Even if you lock it up,
Hey, you
somebody
still
tries to
lock it up.
steals
You
it.
just fucking
It'll
keep.
the frame will just crack as soon as somebody tries to rip it apart from the lock. You know,
Yeah.
against the whatever you locked it to in the metal of the lock, it'll just crack, and your expensive carbon fiber frame is now compromised or useless. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Well, I mean, that's even worse.
I know. That makes it even worse. So you kind of want a shitty, cheap bike. You want something to kind of like that doesn't have any apparent value on the outside. It's only valuable to those who know. You know, like that's kind of the philosophy I take on my bikes these days. It's like I want something that's like, you know, it still costs a pretty penny. It's not expensive, but it's like it's cool. It's like it's useful for me. And as some thief looks at it, it's like, oh, it's not a carbon fiber, you know, super bike, road bike or whatever. So they pass it by usually, but
it's not a triathlon bike or anything.
right.
So they keep walking past.
Yeah. People don't lock those up because they're just, it's obvious they're expensive just from the frame material alone.
Yeah, the shape of the damn thing.
So yeah, that's basically what YouTube is. It's a carbon fiber bicycle. No, just kidding. You got away from your point,
except it's not as cool.
It's not as cool or fun.
No, it's a fucking nightmare now.
Hey, we're real YouTubers. We're complaining and bitching about YouTube already. You don't even have
we haven't
video.
even like 2 views. It's not even like the comments or the viewers that are frustrating at this point. It's just like the fucking impediments of uploading videos to YouTube. You know, like they put up every wall that they can to make it as difficult and frustrating. I think they just want to dissuade users at this point, honestly. I feel like they just have too many users.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. You know how big their servers must it just must take up all of Wyoming or some shit.
Like, I mean, I'm sure.
Where do they keep these servers? You know what I mean? Like, how many hard drives are involved here?
I don't know.
There's no fucking way. I don't get it. I have no idea how it works.
It's like a year's worth of videos gets uploaded like every second. You know?
Yeah, that's like some absurd thing.
It would take you a year to watch everything from 1 second of 1 minute, one time of 1 hour, one time. Like just a second would take you a year. So
yeah.
and it just never stops. It's like fucking Jeff Bezos money. It just never stops. It's just always growing and growing and growing. I don't know, man. This world does not make sense to me at all. Meanwhile, me and you are fucking walking around with master's degrees and
door dashing and shit.
Yeah, door dashing and doing hard labor and this ridiculous job, that ridiculous job. Fucking lost count of how many jobs I've had since I got a master's degree that weren't in academia, just to fucking keep the bills at bay for as long as I could.
Sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't know. When you are teaching, it doesn't suck. It's other things that suck. Is um, it's the frustrating hours and the frustration of how stupid so many students are. And
right. Well, the frustration for me was mainly the lack of stability when you enter like as an adjunct. I know a lot of people in my program didn't even have that problem. They just got a job, like a professorship or whatever, like some even tenured track right away, just because of like their publications, and like they were hot, I guess, at the time. Other people though struggle. Like I said, like I've had friends who, just like you, have had like hard labor jobs, like cutting down trees and just bouncing around. Some go back to school because what else are you gonna do? Might as well get a PhD, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, that's a steady source of income for 5 years,
Yeah, you get health insurance at least, right? I mean, and it's not a lot of money. I mean, but it is something.
I think I just reached my capacity to sit in a classroom and listen to people bore me for hours at a time. Uh,
Yeah, your
what?
ego's way too big to go to grad school, dude.
Yeah, to go back to
You'd be like,
school for
we,
philosophy or for a PhD. Yeah,
dude, who am I kidding? When we were in undergrad, we were too big for it all. It felt like.
I mean, I was.
Honestly, we're better now, I think, than we were back then. But I
Yeah,
agree. Like, I don't know if I could like just go back and like go back to that life that's and having to study constantly and read shit that other. I mean, there is value in that. Don't get me wrong. Like reading things that you're not used to, like that are outside of your wheelhouse, of course. But just and writing papers and having to maintain my classes on top of all that, like teaching classes, dude.
yeah,
It
it's
was
tough.
hell. It was pretty hellish looking back on it. And as easy as our degree, like technically is compared to like we weren't becoming doctors, we weren't becoming nurses. We were.
Well, no, but those things are like hard sciences, so there's a lot less arguing
That's true.
about. Um, I mean, from what little I know from watching House, so really I should just shut the fuck up. But it seems, and they do plenty of arguing in the show too. But it's only in the diagnosing of patients. It's not so much in like, um,
Right. It's like this is what we know based off of studies and research, and apply it to the situation. It's not like, well, it could mean this. Well, the author was in this period of their life, so they might have meant that. It's not all this. And
yeah, it's not
writing
all.
in general is just like coming up with poems is like, or stories. It's there's so much like mystery to it and factors that are kind of outside of your control sometimes. Um, as we've
Always.
talked about a
They have to
lot,
have. It can't be fully in your control, otherwise it just feels
right?
stilted.
And
If you're just.
we've known people that have come from like a science mind, and they try to like apply, they try to write these like really by the books clinical poems. You actually see them a lot in grad school, because part of like the allure of going to grad school and learning to write is like thinking that it's going to be demystified. Like the masters, your teachers that you go to are going to demystify it, and it's the exact opposite.
Yeah,
they just
they
reveal that
mystify
it's
it
like
more.
yeah. They're like, yeah, because you go into with whatever ideas you have about writing, and then they have their own, and everybody kind of has their own, and that's kind of the thing that makes like writing difficult. That everybody has to figure it out for themselves.
Right.
Shit, that kind of leads into that poem Archetypes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
I mean, talk about somebody having their own voice and their own style of writing and of getting or of arriving at the poem. You know, so archetypes, or which one do you want to talk about first? I mean, we can talk about both of them together. I don't care.
Yeah, we could just start off talking about both of them. I do want to go. I think I want to go in a gas station like first. But the reason why I said that is because like at the end of the poem, like it's a love poem, but at the end of the poem, he says, "For a more abiding ancient terrors, we must have. We each have to find our own valor, like our own,
Our own valor.
our
Yeah.
own way through." And that's kind of a good metaphor for writing, I think, in a lot of ways. Because it's not just like your own finding your own voice, which is what you're kind of talking about in C.K. Williams is like, that's what I love most about him. He just has this voice that's like really honest, and it's just his own, and it's like it's you feel like solid in his narration, because of his voice.
Yeah.
But not only do we have to find our own voice, we have to find each poem, we have to find our own way through it, or each story is its own new thing as well. So
I mean, Archetypes, just to talk about it really briefly, is one of the poems I've taught last semester.
Oh really?
I taught it. Yeah, I taught it on Valentine's Day as a love poem, and
Yeah, it's a love poem.
and I was like, it's a love poem, but the message of it's actually pretty bleak in terms of love and understanding. What he ultimately is arguing in this poem. And I wouldn't bring this up at the beginning of the class, bring it up at the end, but after we've already dissected what the lines and everything. But the message of the poem to me was just how far apart we all are from each other and from ourselves,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, for sure.
how there's so much about ourselves, and our history and our instincts that are just so far removed from our conscious mind that ever truly understanding anybody is an impossible task.
Yeah.
And so, in that respect, it's really bleak. It's a really bleak poem, but it's also, like you said, really written really tender. What C.K. Williams loves to do is pick really tender moments to just really brief, tender moments, as Leon Lee does, and describe them as sincerely as he possibly can. But you never you also feel like, for as sincere as the language is, it's also very um intelligent. It's
Hmm.
I mean, for Christ's sakes, he's talking about Nietzsche and fucking every other philosopher of the 20th century
Oh yeah, we'll definitely get into
in
that shit.
gas station. And in this one, he's describing an archetypes. That is, he's describing all the bones of her hand and the pads of it,
Yeah.
resistant skin and dense muscles, the subtle complex structure with delicately elegant chords of bone aligned like columns in a temple.
It's just so beautifully articulate. It's so articulate that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. It's great, and that's he's just writing into the poem. He's just writing a scene.
Yeah.
The first line. That's just all one line. He's this poem's kind of weird. Like it has that long line. The second line and that first line's pretty long, and then it kind of shortens up when it gets to the heart of the poem when she's like on the bed. But yeah, the writing style that's what always strikes me with him, especially when it really works. Like in these two poems, it's just immaculate. It feels really fresh. I guess is the way to put it. I guess that's why I picked these poems because I thought they were like I didn't read them beforehand. I was just looking over the bookshelf. I was like, fucking C.K. Williams, man, and these two poems come to mind immediately. Like, and you compare him to his other, like his really famous poem is Tar. Remember that one?
Of course.
About 3 Mile Island, which is great too, and it has those same long lines and like super intelligent, like syntax. The way he writes is just super like articulate, I guess I should just say. But even in that poem, just kind of, I think it's bogged down a little bit. I'm not gonna shit on that poem. It's fucking awesome too. But compared to these ones feel lighter in their narration, is what I'm kind of getting at. Even though they're still like
He
super
doesn't
articulate.
dwell so much in the image,
Right.
which is, by the way, is something like you would never think to tell a poet. Like, you're dwelling too much in the image and the description of the image, and even though it's all beautiful, like, you want to get to the things that are happening and what's important. You want to get to the heart of the matter.
Right,
You
and
know,
it makes sense for that poem because the way he's describing the roofers is kind of he gets in the weeds, within it's like this hellish imagery, and he's kind of thinking of the disaster. So it makes sense, like it's imbued, the disaster's imbued on the way he's talking, and that's why he gets in the weeds. So there's at least a reason for it, and that's why the poem like works ultimately, and is great. But dude, I've written poems that are just like fucking image time, let's go. And you're just like arbitrarily going crazy with the imagery. And you're not thinking, well, the reader's probably thinking, what the fuck is the point of all this? You never think that with C.K. Williams and Tar, because you're like, oh, he's kind of in his head about this fucking disaster, going on. And in these poems, he has a very light touch. Even when he's describing the hand, it's quick, it's just one. It's a long fucking line, but it's just one line, a short little paragraph, basically. And then he moves on. The movement is like what carries this poem. It carries both of these poems, actually.
Quick, like you said, it's quick.
Yeah, it's quick. It's really fast.
Which really is the beauty of poetry, isn't it? That somebody can you can read it out loud, and somebody gets the whole of it, right from the first read, and.
Right. And I say it's funny that I say quick because these are like chunky poems. These are not short poems, but but they feel quick. It's not Maya Angelou, It's not it's not this like it's not Bukowski. Bukowski is like the ultimate like light and quick poet. But it has that same kind of energy. I read a Bukowski poem after this. For some reason I was thinking of Bukowski. And he wrote this like long, the 4th of July in the early 30s or some shit. It's like a narrative where he's just kind of talking to his friend and they're throwing firecrackers into the air. But their lines are like 3-4 words long, way shorter. But this poem still has that kind of lightness. And I'm trying to like make that connection. But I think what it is the way he's writing these poems. Like I said, line to line, there's a lot happening, and there could be like big jumps in the narrative. For instance, I'm thinking more in terms of gas station. You see this, but I guess when he's describing a hand, when he jumps from a hand to like an action happening, when she gets on all fours on the bed, it's like it's kind of a big difference in imagery or in scene, I guess. Going to that minute detail. Too. Yeah, it's surprising. That's the word, surprising. And we'll talk about that in Gas Station too, and how that poem moves. But it's a big surprise. It goes from this image, this intricate image of the hand, to like her just being on all fours. Like it's this really delicate and like nice, loving imagery to this kind of like almost horrifying moment that happens.
Yeah, horrifying and weird. It's a fucking weird thing to be.
Really fucking weird.
Laying down next to your wife, you're looking at her grace and her beauty, and all of a sudden she, in the middle of a dream, starts acting like a wolf, or some bestial thing.
Yeah.
And then falls back asleep, and it's like, just really human moments. By the way, there's this YouTuber, or not YouTuber, Instagrammer, who I follow because he reads a lot of Lord Byron, and he has this beautiful voice. And what I love about this poem in modern poetry, when it's really good, is that it's so not like the romantics, who are always just describing women and their loves as if they're perfect. And it's just like ungodly. Not that the imagery and the words aren't beautiful. Lord Byron, wonderful poet for his time, but it almost is like the difference between the old painters and the surrealists and the modernists, Well,
the modernists kind of undid all that bullshit. Thinking of this poem, I forget who it's by. One Perfect Rose, and like the big turn is like, why one perfect rose? Give me one perfect limousine, fuck all that bullshit. I want something real, and that's that's what the modernists like ushered in. This kind of like renouncing that like everything's beauty is anything beautiful is perfect, and the contemporary poets kind of like hammered the ones that we really love, kind of like hammered home, and like Sharon Olds talking about what Sharon Olds talks about. We don't have to get into like
Like
fucking
losing your diaphragm or a really bad
right.
period or losing your virginity or taking somebody's virginity. I mean, for Christ's sakes, let's be honest, John. You wake up the first thing in the morning, at least for me, and the first thing you do is take a shit. Like so much of life isn't romantic. So much of life is just disgusting.
Yeah.
I mean, for Christ's sakes, before we did this video or before we did this podcast or whatever it is, I was downstairs eating a turkey sandwich, and I was just like grabbing potato chips out of the bag, and as I'm chewing these potato chips, like a fucking mouthful like of unbitten potato chip just falls out of my fucking mouth, and I'm trying to like dig through the fucking closet looking for it so I don't leave it there. And I'm like, my God, I'm a disgusting fuck. I got mayonnaise and mustard all over my fucking beard. You know,
Hey, dude. Every time I go to take a piss, it's a fucking ordeal. Right. I gotta make sure it. You know.
yeah, it's not pissing all over the
Yeah,
floor.
yeah. Not over the floor. Not. I didn't make sure I'm in too early. It's fucking
I
gross.
mean, scratching my scalp right now. I feel like a little zit. I pop it while we're fucking
Yeah.
talking. I mean,
Yeah.
just so much of life is disgusting, and that's kind of the theme of these two poems. Actually, is that or not if not disgusting, um, really unromantic. We'll say. Especially gas station. We'll get to that in a second. But so much of life is unromantic.
Right.
And so much of life is a mystery. And so much of life is these little glimpses of things that nobody else sees. And that's really the job, not to harp back to what is the point of art, but I guess that's kind of my theme lately because it's something I've been thinking about a lot. But really, the point of art is to shine a light on those things. When the shining of the lights on those things makes us see some deeper part of ourselves, some deeper part of what it is to be human.
Yeah.
I really do feel like it's not just to highlight the romance. Not that the romance isn't great, also, because sometimes the romance makes you understand a deeper part of your own humanity. But um, modern arts is very concerned with surprising readers. We've already had so many Victorian poets and so many Victorian painters and so many Victorian playwrights talk about the intricacies of perfect love and what that would entail and
Uh huh.
and the complications of that. But the reality is, especially for us here in America, especially us here in South Florida, so much of our life is the opposite of fucking perfect, um and that's what we have to talk about because it's our experience, you know.
Right.
So that's why I taught this poem on Valentine's Day of all days. These kids are all budding spring. They're courting each
Yeah,
other, and
Craig
I'm like,
you had to
guys.
bring him down to reality.
Well, it's not
You
even
could be married your whole
bring
life. You
them.
don't even know that person. They just wake up one day in the middle of the fucking night. They bark like a dog and go back to sleep like nothing happened.
And you love them anyways for it. You love them because people surprise you. It's part of what keeps you engaged in the love and in that person is the elements of surprise. I also teach Garrison Keeler's poem Hoops. Remember that one
Yeah.
where she just beats him in basketball while she's dressed in a summer in a black dressing gown. Um, so much of courting is um learning new
You mean
things
basketball?
about the person and being not courting as in basketball. Courting is in like making somebody fall in love with you and falling in love with them, and finding out if the relationship is compatible, and if it's sustainable and if it's engaging. Um, and So yeah, it's not just bringing them down like, oh, you'll never know somebody. Ha! It's like that's the beauty of life, is that you'll never fully know somebody, and that you really wouldn't want to,
Right.
because if you could, it would cease to be a surprise. Um, and it's to never
Right.
lose. Once again, it goes back to James Aggie, never losing that childlike curiosity of life and of people.
And maybe that's the
Um,
point of art too, is because you can't, the thing that makes writing so difficult is what makes it so interesting. It's so hard to master, to make good art over and over and over again.
of
All we
course,
can control is the craft side of it and the dedication, um, and sitting down and doing it basically. But whether it's going to be good, bad, or great, you could probably make something good consistently, but great and like timeless, good fucking luck. Um, that just requires a lifetime.
and even if you do it great once, it doesn't mean you're going to do it great the next time.
Exactly.
It's. I mean, thank God you did it great once, so you could not lose faith that you could ever do it again.
Right.
Um, but
Yeah, you gain a little confidence when you do it well, and then and that
and,
keeps you
and,
going, I guess.
and confidence is so much a part of it too, because it's so much
Yep.
a head game, and it's so much about approaching the subject matter like you know it better than anybody else in the world, and that these are your characters and your story, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But
There's a weird like confidence in C.K. Williams's voice, where he
oh yeah,
doesn't he never plays the know-it-all, but he knows what he's trying to say, even when he's questioning what he's saying, like in Gas Station.
yeah.
Um,
Let's
which
just
is
let's just switch to gas station
all
because
right.
we have so much to say about it. It really is. I want to say before we even say anything else, it really is a poem that I feel like a lot of people would, a lot of straight white men would have very little confidence showing this to an MFA crowd, or really to a modern poetry crowd. Honestly, we're
Oddly enough, I discovered his poem through a straight white guy at my program. It was summer. We were in boot camp, or I was in boot camp, which was like it's like a crash course, 6 weeks, how to teach, how to teach in the writing center, how to run a class, basically. And so I discovered what the writing center was on campus, and I was like, oh shit, I could just go there. And I found out one of the poets who's like a PhD student was at the writing center that summer. And I went there and I brought him a poem. I brought him that poem that was about my mom. It was about my mom like grabbing my balls. Uh, and that never happened. That actually never happened, by the way. I was just having a lot of fun with like narrative poems back then.
yeah.
Um,
I remember this
by
poem
the way,
actually.
I every time I think about my mom having all my poems, I put that one in there, and I just don't want her to ever mention it. I put a disclaimer at the beginning of that book. But anyway, I brought him that poem just to get like some free feedback, I guess, because it was free. Um, and he was just like, "What the fuck is this?" And he said that very nicely, of course, because it was grad school and everything. But and he was like, "Here, you got to read this poem, "The Gas Station" by C.K. Williams." And that's when I read it. I was like, really surprised. I actually wasn't surprised then to get it. Looking back, I'm surprised because this is like the best poem I was ever suggested in grad school, and it came like in the first weeks of being there.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I guess I just am. He gave it to me because he felt safe. I don't know if he taught this poem. He told me he taught this poem, so he actually did teach the poem there. But
Did he
it's
teach it to an MFA class? So is my
oh
question.
no. You can't. I don't think you could teach. You're right. This poem be like, it's so like it has a grossness about it, that is like, I don't know. The MFA class can be like so fucking like Puritan. You know what I mean? Like if you bring any like weird shit like this, people like try to act like it's okay, but you could feel the room shift. Like, ew, why are you talking about this? You know, it's probably why Sharon Olds gets a lot of shit in that, or she used to maybe before she like broke through years and years ago.
No, she still does
Does
occasionally.
she?
Not as much as she probably got in the past, but I remember it was a thing at the Dodge Poetry Festival that people were like, um, she got interviewed by this woman, and the woman kept asking her like, why do you write sex poems? Why do you write about your family? Why do you talk about, you know, why do you talk about why do you use such graphic language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Same old shit that every other fucking interviewer asked her like for the past 40 years of her career. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know, it must get frustrating. Like Quentin Tarantino hears the same shit again and again and again. Like, why do you have so many of your characters say the N word? Why do you glorify violence so much? Blah 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 blah. And at this point, it's just like I'm not answering that. I've answered it in the past. If people want to know the answer to it, they can look at old interviews. I'm not talking about that right now. And
Actually,
I feel like
I saw the interview you're talking about. It was recent, right? Like some guy was trying to like bait him or something into
yeah,
talking about this shit again. But
yep. And Tarantino. I mean, and to his credit, like after they moved past that, Tarantino just continued with the interview. He wasn't like a total prick to the guy afterwards, but he shut it down. And I feel like that's kind of what you have to do. Like I would personally teach this poem to a grad class. And if anybody was like, this poem's offensive to me, I'd be like, good. It's like that's kind of the point of some art is to be offensive, and he's not talking about all right, so for anyone who's not familiar with the subject, point or not the point, the subject of what happens in
like
this
the
poem.
narrative, the
Yeah, the
plot of it, I
narrative
guess.
is that three characters, um, or is it four, including the narrator, go and get a blowjob from a prostitute, and um, he's not sure. First, they meet a pimp, and they're not sure if the prostitute is his girlfriend, his wife, his sister, or his mother.
Right.
And the whole and the description of the blowjob is really mechanical.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, so much of grads. By the way, the reason that we're like, why couldn't you teach this in grad school? Or why would you have trouble with that? Is because so much of grad school is spent discussing the various forms of rape culture and the various machinations of intersectionality and power dynamics and the glorification of rape culture, which this poem would probably be called,
Well,
um, or any
here,
poem about prostitutes would probably be called. Go ahead.
right. Well, the poem is constantly trying to redeem the speaker's constantly trying to redeem himself. Why do you think he starts off talking about all these great theorists and philosophers? He's trying to
Right.
like up the ante, like it's about to go real like grimy. So he's kind of like starting at a place that if you're in academia, you're comfortable with, right? And then he brings it down to earth a little bit and gets grimy. And even that description of the mechanical nature of the blowjob he received leads into the big turn into the poem about him writing this down mechanically. Like he's doing this, he's like kind of making an analogy to what she was doing to what he's doing. Like, why are we doing this thing? um,
Before I'd read Nietzsche, before Kant or Kierkegaard, even before Whitman and Yeats.
yeah, so
I
the poets are like, fuck yeah, Whitman and Yeats, man.
I don't think there were three words in my head yet. I knew perhaps that I should suffer. I can remember I almost cried for this or for that. Nothing special, nothing to speak of. Probably I was mad with grief for the loss of my childhood, but I wouldn't have known that. It's dawn, a gas station, Route 22.
So
Really, I mean,
what do you think?
he's talking about childhood. He's talking about
Yeah.
Um, being poor from the lower classes of childhood and from adolescence. And
It's
it's
definitely
like
alluding to suffering. Like, I knew that perhaps I should suffer. What a weird, like, kind of weird thing to say and like relatable to. Oddly, maybe all humans can relate to that.
maybe he's thinking that he should have suffered for this. I think instinctively knew that what he was doing was not some glorious thing,
Yeah.
But to speak to the, I mean, I don't want to read the whole poem, but to speak to the higher message of the poem, I think the point of the poem is that we're never going to and this is really my whole critique of grad school, is we're never going to understand how to stop these things from happening unless we can talk about them honestly, and so much of grad school feels like it's stifling free speech. And it scares off most professors from teaching a poem like this, and you get out of grad school, you're so fucking like tired of um coddling uh other writers that you kind of overcorrect. Is where we're at now with this whole anti woke thing, and this, I live in a fucking state where my governor is saying this is where woke goes to die. Most people can't even define the word woke, not to bring politics into all this, but uh, I think the bottom line is that people just want to be able to say what they feel and what they've experienced. And sometimes you need to talk about, the awkwardness of um, three young men at a gas station who just got a blowjob from a prostitute, and
Right.
how
He's writing that. He's
gross
kind
it
of
is.
writing this to himself, like if he had this poem, maybe he would have the words to like describe it and to say like I don't want to do this shit, before it got there. I mean, there's inherent value in it for that reason. I did like one of the questions of the poem is for me. Given the turn when he says, "And now forward Mark's fathers tell me, what am I doing? This, telling this on her, on myself, hammering it down, cementing it, sealing it in, but a machine too. Why am I doing this?" Um, it is a question you have to ask yourself. I think sometimes as a writer, like, what is the point of like if you're this kind of writer and you're drawn to like telling these grimy little stories, these little scenes that you know, that shed light on your life or, who you are. Why are you doing it? So he deals with that question in the poem. I don't know if he really finds an answer. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I mean, the answer is simply, for at least for me, we talk about these things because they happen and because they're important. You know, I mean, well, like, what's the alternative? The alternative is we talk about what's already been talked about, which is the perfect love, that romantic Victorian era shit that doesn't resemble life in South Florida. Like it doesn't resemble the life that I've led up till now. I spent fucking 10 years of my life working at a fucking strip club where this kind of thing was happening all the time. You know,
Yep.
um, my father got me into the business, and I worked with my father for those 10 years. And I mean, just so much, so many horrible
Right.
fucking stories, but real stories.
And these
You
stories
know,
resonate with people who maybe have experienced something like this or this exactly. Why do you think like hip hop became so fucking popular in the 80s and 90s, dude?
yeah,
Eminem,
because they were talking about the grime. They were talking about the grime of life
fucking
that no other music at that time was talking about. Now, by the way, point of music has always been to talk about this stuff. you can go back and look up. I think it's Mozart has a song literally titled like "Eat My Asshole," in German.
What?
So going back to the furthest reaches of arts, you know, we've always been talking about the reality of life. In the Victorian era, that's what was praised was the highfalutin, high class, luxury, perfect um, portraits of perfect people, uh, nothing scandalous. If anything scandalous, got like Sergeant Singer painted this one of the few guys to break out in England of all places, painting scandalous socialites, with like an elbow strap down over her elbow. I'm sorry, a shoulder strap down over her elbow. That was scandalous back then. And it's like, why? Why should this poem offend anybody when you go down the street and get the same thing for $10? You know, um, why should it
Yeah.
be? Why should it be offensive? Like that's what's offensive. It's not the poem. It's that there's some 15-year-old girl giving it up down the street for $10. That's what's offensive because she has a habit to feed, or because she has a kid to feed, or whatever, or several kids to feed. Or some boy. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at the newspaper. Every horrible act that a human being could perpetrate on another is constantly going on in this world. And really, I don't know if we talked about this before, but it's something. It's an anecdote from grad school that's worth mentioning in light of these poems.
Okay.
12 Years a Slave by uh, Solomon Northrop. Um, a real story, by the way, nonfiction about this northern African American who ends up being captured and dragged to the South. Um, Lived his life free as a free man and became a slave in the South until he escaped. Made a movie of it not too long ago. And in the movie, as in the book, one of the women was tied up and um, her feet were beaten. I don't know if it was with a whip or with a stick, but essentially her feet were badly beaten because she kept leaving the plantation to go get soap because her master's mistress wouldn't give her soap because she knew that the master was having sex with her, really was raping her. Student in my grad class was like, why do I have to watch a scene of this woman getting her feet beaten with a stick, whatever she was beaten with? Why do I have to? Why do I have to know that? Why do I have to see that?
Uh-huh.
The answer is the
Yeah.
same answer to this. It's because that happened. Because that is
Yeah.
still happening on this planet. Because we are still a species who cannot um, get over our violent tendencies.
Right. The narrative helps not repeat history. Why do you think Holocaust
Yeah,
narratives exist? Same reason why
yeah,
slave narratives exist. Same reason why we're writing poems about our shitty fucking childhood. We want this to stop. We want it to change.
yeah,
We need it to be out there so that we don't repeat the mistake. To speak kind of on a grand level, that's kind of what you're trying to do, right? In the On the personal level, though, it might be more of a cathartic act to write about it, to understand it yourself. Which is,
yeah,
I think, what C.K. Williams is his aim in this poem.
yeah.
Um,
Why did I do this? Why
but
did I do
to
this disgusting act?
but to allow yourself to write it, also, it's not
Yeah,
like that. That doesn't have an inherent value to the world. That might be the impetus for writing it, but that doesn't have an inherent value to the world. The inherent value to the world is the grander idea that writing about it ultimately helps other people avoid it and helps us avoid this type of shit. And obviously, it's just one poem, it's just one book, whatever. I mean, it might not. It's not all powerful, but it definitely helps. It makes us smarter, you know.
So many of us, I mean, this is the case for the two of us, I think. So many of us just like go through life feeling like we're fucking alone on this planet, you know? Um,
Yes.
when I was like 16, I was so tired of being alone that I just started pretending that I was as dumb as the people around me. And it wasn't too long after pretending that I started. I mean, I wasn't just dumb, I was full of fucking venomous rage about so many things in my life. And I ended up joining a gang and I ended up doing a whole bunch of dumb shit. I ended up eventually at 19 getting arrested and going to jail, which is to say, I mean, my brother went through the same thing, by the way, and just had never had a catharsis that it's better to be alone than to be around idiots like this. And when I finally discovered literature and people who could make sense of literature to me, uh, the loneliness stopped. But it was poems like this that helped me bridge that gap between
Yeah.
I'm just fucking alone on this planet to oh shit there are people like me. And by the way, that's probably a big theme of this poem. You
Yeah,
know,
it definitely is. I mean, think about how it starts. We talked about it. It's appealing to academics first and like at first, but then it really appeals to people maybe like you who and me who when we're in academia we feel like outcasts because it doesn't seem like everybody has had that kind of like grimy shitty like experience in a lot of ways like this poem kind of describes the
a lot
seedy
of them
parts of
haven't.
life. I hesitate to say it because I don't know for sure, but a lot of them, yeah, a lot of them haven't. But
I mean,
and
I don't
and
hesitate to say it. I'm sure that there are problems
there are other problems,
in
of
the
course.
everybody nobody escapes this life without having not just problems but tragedy happen
Right.
befall them. All right, so I'm not making that argument, but most people, John, have not worked at a strip club, in academia, like anywhere in college. Probably find in a university of 30,000 people, you probably find like five people who've gotten their bachelors who have worked at a strip club, like as a bartender or something. But think about that.
Yeah.
Uh, think about like how few people ever really make it out of the luck. How few people like come from. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at look at your family, look at mine. Look at, not just your immediate family, but your extended family. Like how many of them got a bachelor's degree? You know, how many of them got a master's? How
It's a
many of them
great
got an
question.
associate's? Literally nobody in my family that I know of even went to college. Uh,
That's wild. It's wild.
I don't know anybody related to me who went to college. I don't know anybody, at least my age or older. I'm sure I have some like distant cousins who are going or something, but again, they're not even living in South Florida. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's such
Yeah,
a
I mean,
rare thing
like
to
kind of
come.
the same, but yeah, it's weird. It's weird. You were definitely like against the odds, I think, going to school and shit, given
Yeah, none of
your
literally
surroundings
almost.
and the jail
The,
thing.
if you were to tally up everybody in this country who has a master's degree and has spent a month in jail, it's probably like 10 people.
Yeah,
Um,
for
in the whole
sure.
fucking out of all 300 million people in this fucking country. So it's a rare thing, you
Let's say it,
know.
Craig. You're built different, bro.
I mean, I don't know. I did it all out of desperation. I did it all
Right.
out of desperation to not go back. So there's nothing like grandiose about it. And trust me, they didn't. Um, it wasn't like I like I'm not somebody who, and truth be known, I'm also like, I'm not trying to sing the blues here either. I'm a straight white man living in the South, so
You're in DeSantis country, man. You
yeah,
have 40 acres
there's
and a
no
mule.
reason that I should have felt as ostracized as I did, but I did. Um, and I don't glorify, you know, uh, the life that I've led up till now, or the life of my family but I just try to tell it as honestly as I can. I feel like that's everybody's job as a writer is, to just talk about what they've been through honestly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I definitely wrote that down when I was reading this poem. Like this,
yeah,
it kind of goes back to what I was saying about his voice and how like honest it is. You know, one thing I noticed when you read like a poem like written by a master, and it's something you spend like 10 years trying to get right. I think when you first start writing, it's just finding your voice. And what I mean by that is it's kind of it's not just his it's all right, that's kind of like a abstract way of putting it, but it's just being honest to who you are as you sit down and write this thing. And it never wavers from that perspective, even though he's going in and out of like a couple scenes, right? The scene in New York, with the pimp and his wife or whatever, and then the scene in the gas station when the other kid's trying to jerk off. Like he's never like he's never outside of that perspective as like a grown like an adult, looking back. He
right.
maintains that, like he makes little comments like "I'll never see this one again" when he's talking about a friend like staring through the window of the car. Just shit like little things like that he touches on that kind of like grounds the voice of the speaker as this person looking back. I know it sounds like a really simple thing, but it's something really easy to fuck up, especially when you're writing about poems as from like as you were looking back as a kid. So
Yeah,
I don't
you
know.
have
It
to write.
kind of creates like a confidence in the language, which is pretty impressive. He and like what am I thinking of? Philip Levine, man, they have this like confidence in how they write a poem, which is like unparalleled. A lot of we all kind of strive for that, and when it works, it's because you have that confidence in your voice, I think, and it's why a lot of poems don't work when you're starting out because you don't really know what perspective you have on any of this shit. Especially if you're looking back at childhood. I mean, you'll write poems where you're like half in the perspective of the child, half in the perspective of the person right looking back. And it just becomes this like discordant fucking mess. But there's a solidity
Or there
to
is no
this.
scene. There it's just all summary is another big problem of young poets.
Right. Yeah,
And
because
the
you're just
reason
trying to.
the
Sorry.
reason they fall back on wordplay and on summary is because they don't have the confidence to talk about a genuine scene. Um, we've seen that with friends of ours too. Like they're so good when they're in the scene and they're talking about a moment of true tenderness or true um, compassion or true or the opposite, which is what this poem is about. It's about this really disgusting moments and this really sad time in this guy's life,
I think
but
I
he
think there's
writes
a
about it
reason.
sincerely. Go ahead.
Wait, what did you just say? What was that word?
So I said even though the moments is disgusting, he's writing about it sincerely, and he's um, you don't
Right.
judge him as harshly as you probably would somebody like Bukowski. But I feel like even Bukowski, as gross a human being as he was, um, understood like when he was doing something or going through something that was sad, because a human being would. Um,
Right.
Mickey Sabbath, even has his threshold. I mean, that he won't cross. This is a guy that loves prostitutes. I mean, I just feel like to make a human connection, all you have to do is be honest about what you were going through, and especially be honest about. I mean, be honest about what you're going through. Be honest about when you're afraid or when you're sad, and I feel like that will make a connection with the
Yeah.
reader, even if the moments is disgusting. But the truth is, we're all disgusting, John. That's the other thing about. I mean, not to harp on grad school anymore than I have to, but that's
We should
what
call
they
this
had so much
podcast the grad
trouble.
school grumps or something, like bitching
Yeah.
about the past.
Well, that's what they have so much trouble accepting about themselves is not just that horrible things happened to them or to their family, but that they themselves are also horrible because it's part of being a human being is just having these sad compulsions and these sad things happen to you. I knew this one writer in my program who dated this guy who took nude pictures of her when she was asleep and put them all over
God,
the internet after
what?
they broke up. And I'm like, that's a great
Wait,
story. Go ahead. You have a question?
yeah, I mean, what the fuck? Was she a like a nonfiction writer? How did you know about? Did she just tell you this?
She wasn't a nonfiction writer, but we were in a nonfiction class,
Oh, okay.
um, and I'm like, this is a great story, but what's left off the page is why did you like this guy in the first place? Like, what would dating him have entailed? You'd have seen signs from this guy at some point, right? That he was a piece of shit because everybody always does, you
Right. So the
know.
experience, so kind of what you're saying is like the experience of that having happened itself isn't inherently valuable, but like trying to dissect why you would fall in love with somebody so horrible is because everybody is kind of in the back of their mind early in a relationship. You're trying to feel this person out. You're trying to trust them, and we might not be like we're kind of blind to the red flags, right? And that would be kind of cool to see, I guess.
Yeah, there's no I guess about it. It'd be awesome, and it'd be a totally unique story, and it'd be something that people would identify with, And I feel like that's the real testament to vulnerability is being able to not just be like, "Oh, these horrible things happened to me," but like I missed the signs. I and there were these other things about this person that I loved that I was attracted to, and I was a stupid kid because we all are because that's part of childhood is being stupid. you know, like it just is. It's making mistakes. Nobody gets through their childhood without making. Nobody gets through life without making
Right.
mistakes.
Yeah.
And being honest enough to write about them. That's the trick. That's the thing that 99 writers out of 100 can't do is because they're too worried about being a Victorian. Tobias Wolff talks about it in his book, Old
It's
School. Everybody in his school was always trying to write these cool stories, always trying to look cool. And the one that
right.
really moved him was this girl writing about how she'd like pick up cigarettes off the ground that are already smoked, and she'd smoke them, and she'd stalk these boys that she was attracted to, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it's all these fallible human things. That's what makes a connection.
Right. It's fear
And
of looking foolish or looking bad, like looking like a terrible person.
in the
Um,
case of this poem, yeah,
and
both.
yeah, he's kind of dealing with that too by starting off saying, "I don't think there was any words in my head or 3 words in my head." I didn't know anything. I didn't know better. Basically, this is where the story starts. So yeah,
Where
yeah, it's
so many
hard to
stories
reckon with
are.
that.
And then really where every story starts is I didn't know any better. Uh, you know, um,
Yeah.
it's always the mistakes that people make that cause the story to happen. I didn't know any better, therefore, I did this.
Or if you're
I
writing
had
a villain,
I had a
it's
baby from this guy. I married this woman. I dated this girl. I chased this girl all around the country. Blah blah blah. I mean, it's everyone's first. It's the first sentence to any real stories. I didn't know any better, and I mean, it's a sad story, but it's the better of the two poems for that, I think,
more
because it's the
complicated
harder.
too.
Yeah, it's the harder one to talk about. It's the one that's more uncomfortable to talk about because you
Well, that's
know.
I think why the turn hits so hard because it's like it goes from I didn't know any better. This is what I did, and the turn's like here I am writing it. I don't like he's still like not sure what like maybe what he's doing is also it's like kind of like reenacting the past or it's kind of maybe he doesn't know any better still. Maybe is that what he's kind of getting at when he says what am I doing sitting here writing this down? Um,
Coming to terms with it, you know,
yeah. He doesn't say
like
that
that.
though. He doesn't say he's coming to terms, or like it doesn't. He doesn't recognize it. That's like a very soft ending.
See,
Um,
that's the part that like makes me um uncomfortable because it's like it's self doubts that the scene is worth anything, and so much of that feels to me like the university itself. It feels like the university has just gotten into him to such a degree that he's scared to talk about the truth. And by the way, there is some truth to that.
mhm.
Um, not just an EMFA program either, but just universities do not like Bukowski. Universities do not like Henry Miller. Universities do not like Hunter S. Thompson or Hemingway. Um, these men who reveled in, by the way, these straight white men who reveled in depravity and in drug use and in violence and in really, you know, predatory power dynamics. But once again, I mean, you can't deny the talent that's there. You can't deny that these things are still going on. And they're not all, by the way, they're not all white males either.
Right.
The author we talked about last time, Iceberg Slim, author of the book Pimp. I put that on my Facebook as like, man, if I ever teach an anti-heroes book, this book is going to be included in the curriculum. And so many of my colleagues were like, man, I think that's a bad idea. Um, another one of my colleagues was like, I'd rather read a book about his mom who, was just a laundry worker trying to put him through college. I'm like, but that book doesn't exist. His mom wasn't an author. He was like, and I don't know.
I heard a
They,
lot. I mean, I've heard a lot of like shit given to Hemingway.
oh
Which
yeah,
look, it's one thing to like not include somebody you don't like in your curriculum, right? Like Mary Galvin would never. She hated Hemingway, and so she would never like teach him. Um, but it's another thing to like complete like say they suck. They're bad writers because you didn't agree with who they were as a person. And this is a whole another can of worms, by the way, we're opening up. Um,
that's worth talking about though.
yeah.
Hemingway couldn't even mention him in certain classes. And I am not saying that facetiously. I had a professor would not let us say the word Hemingway in her class.
Did she
Philip
talk
Roth.
about that?
She just said at the beginning of each semester, she would say, if it came up. Oddly enough, she'd always bring him up as for the 3 word or was it the 6 word short story?
Yeah.
Um, she'd be like, a lot of people attribute it to him. We don't know whether he actually wrote it or not. I'm not a big fan of his, but I do like the concept of it. Blah blah blah. Um, so she liked that, but if you were to like compare any literature you read in her class to anyway, she would throw a huge fit. Be like, "We're not talking about him." Um, Philip Roth, another one that they don't like.
What, really?
Yeah. Um,
Because it's like Sabbath theater,
Sabbath
basically.
Theater, of course. Uh, I don't know. It's just unfortunate that so much of politics have gotten into the curriculum to rewrite the curriculum as it stands. And so much of the politics have actually infected the brains of writers so that they don't feel like they should be telling these stories just because the contents of the stories are icky or grimy or
Gosh,
have sad, and
it's
predatory power dynamics. But that's life.
right. Especially at that stage in your career, you probably may not have published a damn thing as an MFA student. Um, you're gonna start writing about getting a blowjob in Times Square from a hooker. Maybe that's not the thing that's gonna set your career ablaze. In academia. It's,
But I
it's
mean,
kind of
here's
it's kind of a
the
shame.
point.
I mean, not to say that everybody should be writing about that in particular, but you shouldn't be afraid to write about shit like that, especially if it's happened to you.
Yeah, you should write about it if you have access to those stories. But here's the other point: like, nobody's going to go over to that strip club where I worked and start critiquing any of them. Because number one, you're gonna get the shit beaten out of you. You're gonna wind up stripped naked and thrown in a dumpster unconscious. And number two, you're not gonna change anyone's mind who's working there. Nobody's working there because they like want to be there. It's all out of desperation. So much of
Yeah,
this world, like so many of the decisions that are being made because of of the desperation to survive. That's what it's like to live under capitalism. You know,
right.
um, And some of these women, and some of these men, even if capital wasn't involved, would still be living lives similar to this. Is the other truth of it. So it's not all predatory. Some of it is just the way
Yeah,
that they want to live.
a lot of people revel in the depravity for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've met them. So have you. You know, and there's something to be said. I mean, it's a different story, but it's equally worth telling, in my opinion. So long as it's written true. I just don't think that any artist should be afraid of their own humanity or of anyone else's. Especially reading of it or of watching a movie of it or of looking at a painting of it. I don't see how you claim to be a teacher in the arts and yet there are things that you're unwilling to teach and there are things that you're unwilling to talk about. In a respectful manner, of course. You know,
Yeah,
uh, like Iceberg Slim's life, the life of a pimp. That's all the conditions that made him into that guy still exist. There's still people in this world, serving long prison sentences and getting out, and all the only thing on their mind is, uh, you know, getting money as quickly um and as disgustingly as they can, for lack of a better word. Um, there are still kids being raised by really bad parents. There are still kids being raised by no parents at all, being raised on the street. Those are the issues that we should be getting together. This is why I hated, like, by my third year, I was just done talking in classrooms about the problems of society. I was like, guys, let's go do something, you know? Let's go build some homeless shelters. Let's go fucking start a fucking canned food drive. Let's go, give some fucking food to these people. Let's go do something.
At the very least, write
Um,
about it.
or if we're gonna write about it, let's write about it honestly. I'm so sick of being in a classroom talking about the problems of the world and not doing anything about it. You know,
Yeah.
and I mean it goes back to Dostoevsky. The problems of that kid still exist. That kid is still being born to this day,
Yeah.
and um, and until we're willing to fix that and talk about that honestly, uh, I don't know what we're gonna do. I don't know what we're
Well,
gonna do.
let's
All me
just
and you can do is just write about it honestly and live our
right.
lives. But man,
That's what Dostoevsky did, didn't he? He wrote the story. I mean, it's still
yeah.
obvious. Like I kind of talked about earlier, one story, one poem ain't gonna change the world, but at least bring some kind of awareness to it, to the problem at hand.
I mean, maybe it will.
Maybe, maybe, yeah,
You write every day without hope or despair, and when good things happen, they happen. Um, but when nothing
yeah.
happens, that also happens.
Right. That can't be
you
the
know,
reason. The reason why you sit down and do anything, but like do art, but like I said, it's kind of a grander kind of like reason. But personally, I just sit down and write because there's no other, there's no other way to live a life, and I don't do it. And quite frankly, I haven't done it a lot this year. I feel like shit. You need that catharsis. You need that outlet.
this girl we both know who wrote a story about a daughter who'd been molested by her father so much that she'd become sexually attracted to him and had even started after she'd gotten pregnant. The story takes place um in a shower while she's about to give birth. She starts making sexual advances on the father. And I was talking to her about it after we both read. We both had to read a piece to a bunch of students at Palm Beach State College, and she said that a bunch of students in her program hated the story. Uh, and I told her that a great quote by Marilyn Manson, which is, "You don't measure success solely by love; you measure it by equal parts love and hate." And
Right.
what you don't want is apathy, because apathy is when the story didn't affect anyone at all. But if you're offending prudes, which is ultimately what people who are offended by anything C.K. Williams would write, or Harry Crews, or Iceberg Slim, or Henry Miller, or Hemingway, if you're offending them, your chances are you're doing the right thing. Um,
Right.
and she said what me and you are saying right now, which is, I don't write for anybody, I just write for myself. That's why I sit down every day, and that has to be the reason. I do this
Yep.
because there's something in life that leaves me unfulfilled if I'm not talking about the problems in my life or the problems of the people I know, the people that I love. I have to do it. Some weird compulsion and makes me do it.
Right. Well,
Um,
it connects you to humanity, and as you've been talking about, humanity isn't all love and
very
perfection.
little of it is.
Very
I mean,
little bit of it is,
for fuck's
and
sake,
to
John.
pretend that it's otherwise is dishonest, and that'll come through in the writing, especially in
we
this day and
spent
age, man.
we live in a country that spends more on the military than like the next 10 countries combined. This is just a world full of turmoil. There's a bunch of wars going on in countries me and you like can't even pronounce, let alone locate on a map. Uh, you know, from the most part. And it, by the way, there's plenty of war going on. You know, in North Carolina, Asheville. You know, in South Florida, in Lake Worth. Uh, my fiance is privy to a lot of it. There's a lot of war going out in the streets. A lot of war. People just trying to get. I mean, for fuck's sake, I can't even go to Publix without 10 people asking me for money and me looking at them being like, dude, I need it more than you. You know, I'm as broke as you are, dude. Uh, which, by the way, is the truth. If anyone's listening to this and wondering if I'm being facetious, I got the bank account to prove it. All right.
Hey man,
Um,
I'm in double digits. You know what I mean? At like
hell yeah.
$15. You know, living that life. I might be less than 15. Shit, I got enough for McDonald's. What more do I need?
Yeah, that's about where I'm at. So I mean, we just have to talk about this stuff. So I don't know. This will be our complaint about the MFA podcast and complain about the restrictions on language podcast. But it had to be said because it's a beautiful poem and it's a poem so wrapped up in these problems and the problems of how do I talk, why am I talking about this thing, and how do I talk about this thing without seeming like a skeevy perv, like the idiot kid that I was. The truth is, you just talk about it honestly. That's the answer. You just talk
Right.
about it honestly.
Yeah, and that's
You
definitely what
know?
he's doing, man. That's what he's doing.
Yeah. And it's what we should all do because me and you have both been, if not that kid, a kid a lot like him. You know, I've definitely been that kid.
Yeah.
Spent 10 years working in a strip club. Trust me. Uh, I've seen it, and it's, if anything, it's not an exaggeration. Um, and it's happening all over the fucking world. You know, and until people are willing to go into the whorehouses and go into the alleyways and go into the strip clubs and go into the fucking fly by night motels and start telling those people how to live their lives. Don't tell me what to write about. You know, that's my feelings on it. That's my
That
feelings
sounds
on it.
pretty fair.
If it's happening and if I'm writing about it honestly, then I'm doing the right thing. And if I'm writing about it dishonestly, uh, then your critique is welcome.
Right.
But that's a whole other
Yeah, I don't
argument.
know what's scarier, like being in that like kind of insulated program and bringing something kind of obscene to a workshop, and at best like getting this like quiet, uncomfortable, like, you know, oh, that's nice, or like just getting somebody outright upset about what you're writing about, or graduating and then just kind of toiling away in your own obscurity. Like no one could really tell you what the fuck to do at all. You know, they couldn't really back then, but you at least had an audience that got upset. And now all you can do is throw your stories and poems at a publisher, a faceless publisher, by the way, that will just reject it. You know, and maybe put you on a list somewhere. I don't know, man. It's weird, but
Well,
not to
so much
end
of
on such a fucking sour note, but that's kind of how
I
I
mean,
feel.
it's true. It's so much of the publishers and editors are also, or if not the same exact people as the ones in the university, then they're the same ilk. Uh, and by the way, the
But
story we're going to talk about next week is 1,000 times more unpublishable than C.K. Williams. It's a story about a black man who goes on a shooting spree in a southern town, and it's fucking beautiful. Um,
yeah,
a Child by Tiger. And by the way, it's written by a straight white man, but it's written with
Tom,
tenderness. And it's
old
written
Thomas
with
Wolfe, man.
honesty.
Might go
Yep.
visit his grave before I read it. Grave's right around the corner from here.
You still haven't seen it?
No, we've been there. Well, it's been a year, so I think it's since before we moved here. Since we've
It's
been
the
there.
anti The Lost Child. um, but it's
Yeah.
so fucking good. I'm not gonna say it's as good as The Lost Child,
Lost
but
boy, lost boy.
Lost Boy.
I'm gonna cut you.
Craig. It's not as, I'm not gonna say it's that good, but that nothing is as good as the Lost Boy. All right, just period. Just cancel that shit right now. But it's still fucking gorgeous. It's still, I still have so much to say about it. And like all great literature, it's very much risque, and it's very much something that wouldn't be taught or given to you in an MFA, unfortunately. But that's why you guys listen to us, so you can get the good scoop on the good lit.
I don't know who you're talking to, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Hey
listen,
guys,
I'm talking to our future 3 viewers.
yeah.
um,
Well, anyway, like, share, and subscribe. Put a comment down below
like,
if you
sure,
agree with like Craig, all the bullshit he's been saying, and
yeah, and please don't write to the head of his English department.
yeah. Oh well, we don't know. Where do you go to? Where do you go? You're like you teach at Harvard, right? Yeah.
PG Yale.
Yale. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I get him confused.
Yeah, Stanford next semester, then Brown.
Okay.
Columbia, maybe I'll dean to go let them know how to do it in Columbia. Those fucking half-wits. And,
Dane.
yeah,
Did I just say that, Dane?
I'll dean. A fucking English grad word. Anyways,
All right,
fucking
man.
beautiful talk. How many? All right, you want to hit cancel record?
Uh, yeah, I'll just edit this out.
All right.
Actually, fuck
All right. So we have like 10 videos. Um.